another minute or so. Again, welcome everybody. We're still just waiting maybe for a minute for other people to come in from the waiting room, and we'll get started. Jared, do you still have people in the waiting room?
That was everybody for now.
Okay, it's 5 after, so we'll just do another minute, let some more people hop on in case they're running late, and then we'll get it going.
Cody, while we're waiting, I don't think I ever actually mentioned this to you. So one of the guys who works with me is a really good player in the Met section. Will Knauf.
Mm-hmm.
He got I'm curious if anybody on the call knows his name, but he was like quarterfinalist Met Open like last year, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He played it.
I definitely know that. I definitely know the name, but
he's at Columbia. He's getting his PhD at Columbia, which is why he's out at gosh, I can't remember the club out on Long Island near JFK.
Yeah. So he's like you, a smart guy.
He's way smarter than me.
Come on. All right, let's take a look at the numbers. Yeah, we got 90 people so far. Again, I think there was 120 to sign up, but it's 6 after, so we'll get this going. Everyone, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. My name's Cody Smith. I'm at Old Oaks Country Club. I'm not the main event, Corey is, but I'll just run over a couple housekeeping things. Corey today is going to have a PowerPoint that he's going to run us through. So if you have any questions, throw it in the chat. And then when we're done with the education, which Corey thought it would be 25 to 35 minutes. So there'll be plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So if you don't mind, just keep your microphones on mute, just so we don't have a lot of background noise. So yeah, leave your questions in the chat. Next, before we get going, we have plenty more education opportunities coming up. I know on the website it might have only shown the 3 in January. The team's been working really hard. I know February and March are being filled with a bunch more of educational opportunities. If you can, block your calendar now. The first one that will probably be coming up is Wednesday, February 5th, 11 a.m. Found a gal in Greenwich. Her name is Elise Shapiro. She's a nutritionist, dietarian person. And I've been on a few phone calls with her already, just talking about kind of the life that us golf pros live, and that we all don't look like Rory or Ludwig Aubert. So we could probably all use a little help with the nutrition side of things. And it's our daily life being at the club, and also Mondays when we're competing. You know, what can we use to fuel our body pre-round, during round, and post-round? So February 5th, Wednesday, 11 a.m. I believe is going to be our next one, but we are going to also launch quite a few more educational opportunities. So if this was in person, Corey, I think I would run it like the TGL and Tiger Woods, and you would walk out with theme music and lights everywhere. Unfortunately, I can't cue the Chicago Bulls theme music right now. But everyone, the main event, Corey Jez, if you're not familiar with him, sorry, I'm going to read off my notes, so if I don't look like I'm looking at you on the Zoom. A master's in statistics at Georgia Tech, walked on at Virginia Tech for golf, says he didn't play much, but we know he's got some game. After that, he did 4 years as head of analytics for the Utah Jazz. He also has an app that he uses with his players out on the tour called Tour IQ. He started that in 2019 when he used it, created it for his master's thesis, and he used ShotLink data during that time. He'll get into more about it of what he's using now. But it's 2025. He's now his 3rd year out on the tour. More than a dozen players. Team golf is becoming such a huge thing. He's been working with President's Cups, Ryder Cups, and now he's actually working with a TGL team to help prepare them for the golf courses that they play digitally. So hopefully you guys are tuning in and watching that. By the way, I hope you're helping the USA teams here. Otherwise, we might end this Zoom call real quick. All right. If you're on the wrong side of Marco Simone, I don't know. One thing I thought that was really cool, and you guys will hear about today, it's not just data like, oh, I fade the ball, so I should just aim left. I mean, this is data to improve strategy out on the golf course, but also to improve your training. And that was the one thing I guess I didn't think about when prior to speaking to Corey. It's not just about, hey, first hole, aim 5 yards left, hit. He gets his players some training protocols on how to be better out there. So Corey, I'm gonna leave it to you. Again, anybody, if you have questions during this, please stay on mute. Just throw your questions on the chat. And Corey, the floor is yours.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cody. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you guys having me. Hopefully I will not go too long on this kind of education piece, but really cool that you guys do this for all your section members. I think it's great. I know Cody and I were talking with like Marcus and some other folks y'all are trying to get out from around the tour too, which it's good for us too, to not be to interact with, you know, all parts of the game of golf, not just inside the ropes the week to week that we do. So I've got the chat open too. I can see it. So if folks do have questions, I'm gonna kind of roll through some slides that hopefully take a lot of what I do and try to apply it to how y'all could leverage this from a teaching perspective, from again, course strategy and training perspective. Because while we don't have ShotLink, we do have things like TrackMan and Quad and other launch monitors that can help us get some data for good players. This will probably mostly apply to competitive level players. If the 15 capper who needs help getting it in the air, probably a little less so, but they'll get there too. So kind of without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. We tested this, so it should work. Slideshow. Maybe I can't see the chat now when it's in slideshow mode. So Cody, if there are, feel free to interrupt me with questions. Like, I would like this to be interactive.
If there's a good one,
yeah.
like if it makes sense.
Yeah, please do.
Interrupt.
And then, and so I'm going to spend the majority of this talking less about the work I do on tour week to week with players and more kind of about, it's a little statistical education and a little, and then a little bit about how to apply it to golf. And so we can definitely use the rest of the time that we have towards the end to talk more about kind of what I do week to week, or how players are using ShotLink and how we do that type of stuff, or just war stories from the tour. So so without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. There is math in here. I will explain it all. Cody said one of them hurt his brain. So, but Cody, I promise I'll explain it. So, this is dispersion data. This is actually mocked up dispersion data. So you can imagine the left to right is like 50 yards right, 50 yards left. And by at least one definition of dispersion that's pretty common, people might look and say, well, I'd rather be the blue golfer, right? I'd rather be the guy or girl who is like plus or minus 30 yards off my target line, not the red, which is plus or minus 50 yards off my target line. And this gets at the concept of distributions. And we talk about averages a lot. It's just an easy way to sum things up as a statistical summary. Your average miss is 5 yards right or 5 yards left or whatever it is. But your distribution is actually what matters, right? You can be someone who goes plus 50, minus 50, but your average is 0. But you can be someone who goes +1, -1. Your average is also 0. We'd much rather be the person who goes +1, -1. So keep this in mind. We're going to come back to this as we go through it. So the statistical definition of dispersion, variability, scatter, or spread is the extent to which a distribution is stretched or squeezed. And how we define that can inform strategy. Because if we just look at the min and max value on this slide, the range of outcomes, red is going to be larger, i.e. worse, but we can actually measure that in a different way to make it a little more precise to what we want to do. And that gives us this formula. Anybody in the chat want to venture what this formula is?
Yeah, this is the one that hurt my brain when you shared me the PowerPoint beforehand.
This is going to make sense in a minute. This is the formula for standard deviation. Xi is like the single observation. Mu is the mean. You square them because things that are further away from the mean should get penalized more. So if you're 5 yards offline, it's worse than being 4 yards offline. You get an exponential penalty for being further offline, and then you take the square root of it at the end to get it back into your normal range. So it's the standard deviation. And from a statistical perspective, everything that I want to accomplish as a player or a teacher would want to accomplish teaching players comes back to that formula. Because what we are trying to do at the end of the day is shrink our dispersion. Right? If I could hit a driver and its standard deviation was 0, it would go exactly where I was aiming every time. There's a deeper concept here called bias variance trade-off, because you could have somebody who always misses right, 10 yards right of their target line because they hit a cut or something. But if they always miss that 10 yards right of their target line, it would be very predictable, right? They would be able to get around really, really well and really easily. So their standard deviation would be low, even though they would have an error, versus people who have a very wide dispersion, but no average error, right? So they miss right, they miss left, they miss here, they miss there. Which sums up my game quite a bit. So we will get to why that is important. So standard deviation is the measure of the amount of variation of the values of a variable about its mean. So our mean would be 0. It's our target line. It's where we're trying to finish the ball. A low standard deviation indicates that they tend to be close to the mean of the set. Higher standard deviation indicates spread out over a wider range. So standard deviation, that's a lowercase sigma variable, is a number that I think about all the time. It's how I can cleanly summarize and build a framework to break down a golf hole, or to understand my training, like is my 9-iron and my 6-iron, like if their deviations were the same, that would be a problem. And so it's how I can understand what is going on in a player's game. So this goes back to the red and blue scatter plot I showed on the first slide. If you plotted the distributions of those, you would get something that looked like this. So dispersion, we're all used to seeing dispersion in those rings, right? If you look at a TrackMan combine, you see the ring. If you look at stuff you've seen online probably before, you see the ring. And the ring it's because we can only view it in basically 2 dimensions. We can't view it in 3 dimensions. But the ring is very easy to visualize. You just circle around where all the shots landed. But what we're actually trying to do is create a probability distribution of where our next shot will land. Right? We don't know when we take the club back, we do not know where that ball is going to go. If we did, we would all be playing. We wouldn't even be playing at the Amex this week. We'd be skipping it and going straight to the next elevated event, right? So we don't know where the ball is going to go. It's going to go somewhere in this probability distribution. And if you hit enough shots, at least at a high level of player, certainly PGA Tour, college, high level amateurs, if you hit enough shots, they don't take a uniform distribution. So they don't have an equal chance of ending up plus or minus 30, if we're talking about a driver. They have a normal distribution. So dispersion is not uniform like that blue scatter plot we looked at. It's actually something called Gaussian. This is Johann Carl Friedrich Gauss. And what the hell does a German mathematician have to do with golf? That same bell curve. This is kind of your normal, this is stats 101. You learn it like first day at college, freshman year, the Gaussian, which is just a fancy way of saying normal, but you go to like a party and you sound smart. So the Gaussian distribution. I also, up until grad school, I said Guasan because I didn't know how to spell it either. So it's Gaussian. So if we're thinking about a dispersion pattern and where golf shots are going to end up, again, think about that center line, this average mu just means average, as where we would be targeting. Gaussian distributions have this nice principle that when we know the standard deviation, again, that little lowercase sigma that I have circled there is that formula we calculated before. That little lowercase sigma, it has this nice property of being able to estimate where a random variable gets drawn from the distribution. So what does that mean? It means, again, I don't know when I take the club back where the ball is going to go. Like me personally, I'm across the line, steep, and I get tall at impact and I hit cuts. And I've been that way for 30 years, and that's probably not changing anytime soon. So I don't know if my face is a little closed at impact, that ball is staying left, and my face is too open, that thing is going off the earth to the right. Like I'm sure dozens of players that you all teach. And so I don't know where that ball is going to go, but I do know my standard deviation. I know how big or wide my bell curve is. We're actually going to look at mine here in a little bit. We'll also look at some PGA Tour players. How this sigma is how wide or tight this is. And so we know plus or minus one sigma here is 68% of the time the ball falls within that range. Now this starts getting a little useful. So 68% of the time, if I know this number, let's just say this number is 10 yards. That would be really, really good with the driver. Let's say this number is 10 for easy math. And if I aim down the middle, 68.2% of the time, that ball's going to finish plus or minus 10. So in that 20-yard window. Then I can add 26% onto that, 27.2% onto that to capture those two standard deviations. Now I'm getting 95% of my observations are within a plus or minus two standard deviations. So it'd be a 40-yard window if your standard deviation is 10. So if we know that number, and if we can know that number throughout our bag at different distances, which is really different clubs, but all we really care about is what it is at the distance, that can help inform us a little bit. So what the hell does this bell curve have to do with golf? And it's this. So Colin Morikawa, I don't measure driver accuracy by fairways you hit because fairways are different widths. I measure driver accuracy based on your standard deviation when you hit driver. Ben On also is a great strokes gain driving, but it's basically because he takes driver on every single golf hole. He works with Sean Foley. I know Sean really well, and he basically just forces Ben to hit driver everywhere. I think he leads the tour in driver selection rate. Colin Morikawa is incredibly accurate. So if we think about that formula from before, where you take every single one of these numbers, you subtract it from the mean, which will be about 0 for both these guys. And then you sum all that up, and you're basically measuring the error of each one versus mean, right? So Ben's is obviously a little wider. Colin's, you can tell, is really tightly condensed around 0. So when we do that formula, we get that sigma, that standard deviation value for both these players. So 20 and 14 if we round them off a little bit for easy math. So Ben On's is 20 and Collins is 14. Collins is number 1 on tour last year in this metric. So 14-yard standard deviation. Aaron Rye is second. Some players that you would kind of expect as very, very accurate hitters. This would obviously be very correlated with fairway percentage, but it's more precise than fairway percentage. So how do we apply this? Why does this matter? What do I do if I know this number? So how do I use this in understanding golf? So again, 95.4% of observations fall within that plus or minus 2 standard deviations. This is how for TGL, I can look at the width of a golf hole and say, well, how likely is player A versus player B to hit this fairway? Exactly, because I know the width of the fairway and I know the player's dispersion. If I know those two things, I can create an estimate of that. These are all estimates. This is not perfect. We can't model reality. These are estimates. But it gives us a really, really, really good, precise starting point to work from. So this is number 10 this week at Amex. They're playing in Palm Springs. This is the stadium course. So they play 3 courses this week. This is the one they'll play. Each player plays it once. Then the guys who make the cut play it again on Sunday. It's a really actually very interesting golf hole. Probably only about a third of the field hits driver. Most people lay up out here. But it's like a 290 cover, about 300 to get to this fairway where it widens back up. Sometimes you're playing in the morning, you may not have the cover. These traps play very difficult on the right. But this fairway is 51 yards wide. And if you remember a second ago, our numbers were 14 and 20. So these other two yardages I've pulled off here are 2x those things. So 2 times 1428, 2 times 2040. So that 2 sigma number, again, 90, if we aim down the middle, 95% of the time it's going to be plus or minus 2 sigma. Given that there's water over there, that's how much room these guys need to give themselves. We're not necessarily optimizing in this case for, I will never, ever, 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 ever hit it in the water. Again, it's 95%. Like, it's pretty unlikely that Colin Morikawa is going to hook a ball 28 yards offline. And obviously there's things like run out, how's the course playing, all that's got to be factored in. But as a general framework, we're trying to find the most optimal. So what is the appropriate amount of risk for us to take on? And in this case, we know the right rough is like a nothing burger here. It's the rough this week is very low. There's not much of a penalty for missing in the rough on this hole. Now, Ben, on the other hand, has that wider dispersion if he decides, he hits it pretty long. So if he decides to take driver to cover these traps, which I do still think would be the right play for Ben, he's got to aim in a different place than Colin does. Kind of the funny thing about the Morikawas and the Schefflers of the world, the guys who are the really accurate players, is they actually get to play more aggressively. So it has this like double benefit of like, not only can you hit the ball where you're aiming better than anybody else in the world, but now you get to aim closer to the hole because of that, because you're taking on the same amount of risk, but aiming closer to the hole, getting more reward for that. So Ben has to aim 40 yards off the left edge. Colin gets to aim only 28 yards. That should say left edge, off the left edge here, which means Colin's got another 23 yards of fairway, while as Ben only has another 11 on the right of those target lines. So this is where, regardless of if they hit a cut or a draw, this is not what we're talking about, where they're trying to finish the ball. I oftentimes do not talk to players about the desired shot shape. I really talk to them about where they're trying to finish it and what does the dispersion look like around that. And so if Colin's going to hit a cut, he may start it like over this 8, but he's trying to finish it right here. Same thing for Ben. Colin hits that like famous 1 yard ball cut. So he's going to start like here and finish it there. But so we're talking about where they're trying to finish the ball. So Ben's only got 11 yards to work with, whereas Colin's got 23. And so we can actually this is again, how you create that fairway estimate. Ben's ball's got to end up between 40 left and 11 right, because that thing's 51. That gives him a 68% fairway chance. Colin's got to end up between 28 left and 23 right, the same 51 wide. But because he is more accurate, he buys himself more room on the right. We actually think Colin would hit this fairway 93% of the time. So if Colin has the cover on the strap, becomes like the most ultimate no-brainer of all time in terms of course strategy from our perspective. We don't work with Colin or Ben, so just examples here with two different kind of drivers of the golf ball. So we would not go this deep in terms of like sharing something like this with players, but this is the underlying math to get to how you understand what you can take on. So folks are probably saying, okay, cool. I don't have shot link though. I don't know dispersion. I've never measured this before, but we have TrackMan or Quad or something else. So let's see how that works in a amateur setting. This is what I do for myself, and how I've built this out for myself. So, as I said, I am a left player with an open face. So this is 8 drivers I had from a driver session I did earlier this year. There is a number I really care about here, and it's the side carry number. The side carry number, these are measured in feet on TrackMan, so you have to convert it to yards. Not too complicated. I think even Cody could do it. So you convert this to yards. As you can see, I can get very right with it. And if the face stays closed, face to path here was only, I can get left with it as well. And so when I add up all those numbers, turn them into yards, and you can do this in Google Sheets. I'll show you in a second. It's not the same as the consistency number. I actually don't know what this consistency number, it's similar, although this might be variance or something. Their number's 22.4, my number's 24.5. You're probably going to get roughly the same type of thing. So we just said Colin's number was 13, Ben's was 20, mine's as an estimate. Eight drives is not a big sample. We would want to hit more drives. I'll talk about how we could do this, systematically, but just for the sake of showing some TrackMan numbers, mine's about 25, right? So my one standard deviation with my driver is about 25 yards. I literally would have to aim at the edge of this fairway if I wanted to hit driver here. And so if I was looking at this for an amateur golf tournament, I was saying, well, what is in that right rough? If it's super playable, I can probably still do that. And half the time my ball ends up left of here, half the time it ends up right of here. But I'm going to need to be examining that to determine if I can take this play on or not. So from a statistical perspective, understanding, again, not how do we get better, make our swing, make our dispersion better. That's what you guys are doing day in, day out. But how do we take what we show up with on that day and score as best we can with it, right? And you could update these dispersion estimates over time, these standard deviations over time. But the key to elite golf from a statistical perspective is understanding that dispersion and using that to come up with your strategy to break down a golf hole. And when we are training swing mechanics or we're trying to get feels, we're trying to shrink our dispersion, right? From my viewpoint, how I look at it analytically, I'm trying to get that number from 25 down to 20, right? So if I maybe am trying to get more face control and trying to get less steep so that I can have less variation in my face and face to path numbers, that's me trying to shrink my dispersion. And maybe that's what I need to go work on in 2025 for my game. So when we're training those swing mechanics, what we're really trying to do is shrink that dispersion. So let's look at another PGA Tour example. This is number 8 at Bay Hill. This is a visual of what we show golfers based on the shot link data that we have. Again, we wouldn't have this for like a Med Am or a Med Open because we don't have shot link data. This, you're kind of playing up from the left here. So imagine the hole's going left to right in this direction. So you're coming in across the pond. This is basically a trap pin high right. And we would estimate that as a 35% up and down. So based on all the players that have been in there, if you're a little better, maybe it's 40, a little worse, maybe it's 30, but it's basically a 1 in 3 up and down. This would be very difficult. PGA Tour average is 60. 1 in 3 up and down means you're going to hit like 12, 15 feet. Like it's a very tough bunker shot, as most of them are at Bay Hill. And we know we're going to be coming in from about 175. So for a PGA Tour player, where should we be aiming on this hole? Now, for the PGA Tour level, we can get super mathy and we can game out all of these scenarios. And so what we actually do for our PGA Tour players is I can take their dispersion data. I can take all these different up and down scenarios. So 175 to a red up. This would be a red up and down for us, 35, sub 40%. And I can say, well, if you aimed at the pin and hit a bunch of shots with your dispersion, what would it look like? What would our scoring look like? Now, if you aimed 1 pace off the pin, 2 paces off the pin, 3 paces off the pin, 5, 10 paces off the pin, we use data science and a lot of software code to simulate all that out and to help them come up with an optimal target. So we have kind of these hard cards that our players carry in their yardage books, and screenshot here is showing what's on that for a PGA Tour average. So for 175 to a red up and down, which is what we make this, pins are on average 4 to 5 off the edge. We would have the player another 4 to 5 off that pin, about 10 off the edge. That's all this curve is showing. We've simulated out every possible place they could aim and come up with like 5 is basically the optimal number. You can see if you aim dead at the pin, you score worse. And as you aim further away from the pin, you also score worse because you're now going to 3-putt and things like that. So this is what we do for PGA Tour players. This allows us to start breaking down every single golf hole on tour. Obviously, we have like really good data on every golf hole on tour as well. So we can know these up and downs and we know players' dispersions really well. But a normal golfer doesn't have shot link. And if you're going to go play a competitive event, you maybe get 1 practice round before that event. So how do you leverage this information? How do you create kind of a framework to think about this? This is what I would call like my amateur framework. So there's I'm saying TrackMan here. I think quad measures like a carry side number. I don't own quad, so I don't know off the top of my head. So somebody can correct me, or maybe this would only work on a TrackMan. But what you really need is that carry side number. So, and this is TrackMan work that is, it's when we're not doing swing mechanics, right? So this would be something that I would have a player do when their swing's in a pretty good state, not in the middle of a change. Maybe they're gearing up for stuff. You know, they've got a big stretch of golf coming up. They would kind of want to do this ahead of that when they're in kind of a good state. We're going to look at, 100 to 250 plus a driver, and we're going to hit shots. We're going to hit shots in what we're trying to do is generate that data, that left, right, carry side number at each of those clubs. Ideally, we want at least 20 at each of these. So I would go like 100, 125, 150. They can be toggled up and down a little bit if your wedges are like 90. If you carry a sand wedge 90 and carry a gap 110, you can do it with your sand wedge. It doesn't have to be 100 exactly. But we're kind of looking at like those 25-yard gaps. I would love 20. I would love more. But 20 or so balls at each of those, and not hitting more than probably 5 at a time, because we don't want you to get fatigued and we don't want you to start grooving it either. Like, these need to be somewhat game simulated. We want to record that carry side number. I'll show you how I log this in Google Sheets. Again, I just explicitly want to know I'm calculating the standard deviation, and I want to record the standard deviation of that number. At each of those distances, I'm now going to know the 1 and just 2 standard deviation at each distance, right? So for my wedges, it's going to be very tight because wedge dispersion left to right is not very big. Driver, it's going to be obviously the biggest, and it's going to work incrementally up through your bag, generally speaking. Then what I will do is I will go in a practice round, or if I could do this for my home course as well, I want to grade every tee shot and every up and down. So when I go around in a practice round, and if I don't, PGA Tour is nice. Pins are always in the corners, and they can't be on more than like 2.5 degrees of slope, depending on what the greens are stimping at. And we've played it most of the courses year on year, and we know where the pins were in the previous years. So when I go out to Torrey Pines next week and walk around with players, like, we know where the pins are going to be. Plus, give or take a few feet. They're not going to be in the middle of the green. They're not going to be on slopes. So in practice rounds, great practice to get into, putting down fake cups. I'm sitting on the other side of my office, but putting down fake cups, putting down a tee, whatever, where you think they might put the pin, which is usually, especially if it's a multi-round tournament, like a college tournament, there's going to be 3 pin locations. If it's 54 hole, if it's 18 holes, you're kind of guessing. But, looking at the 4 corners of the green generally, and kind of saying, what would those up and downs be? So if you have a yardage book, just kind of saying like, okay or terrible. Is it playable or is it totally screwed? Very easy framework here. Just like, could I get this up and down, or would I just be like totally knee knocking if I had this chip? Same thing with the tee shots, but it's more, is it in the trees? Totally, I'd have to pitch out. It's essentially or it's a drop or an OB, or it's something I can at least get it up around the green. Kind of looking at it through that lens. So this is all dummy data, but I would go through, I would get 20 shots per. I'm recording that left right number. Negative is to the left, positives to the right. And I'm just in Google Sheets using the standard deviation calculation to come up with those numbers. So you can see 6, 6, 10, 10, 10, 11, 12, 14, and 18. Right? We said Ben Ons was 20. This is kind of dummy data. High-level amateur players, their numbers are going to be, I would expect for the driver, between 20 and 30 probably. And so there's your 1 and just double the numbers for 2. And now you've got something really nice and clean that you can put in your yardage book to help you understand how much room you generally have to work with on any given shot, right? Because again, going back to it, we don't know where the ball is going to go. If we knew where the ball was going to go, we'd be on tour. So let's put this into practice. So we'll use these numbers here. So 18 and 36 with the driver. This is, I just grabbed Sleepy Hollow upper course, number 8. I've never been there, but missed the mid-am qualifier by quite a margin. So if we were dead center target line here, we'd be 27 off the cart path, which is kind of looks like where the trees come in, and that looks like really dense trees to me. So we are going to say that this is, that right is kind of in that second category, that like we cannot be there. It does not look like I can advance my ball up to around the green from there. And so I know from this dispersion for kind of my example data here, I need to be 36 yards off that. And when I look at it here, I'll show you guys in a second the software that I'm using to get these yardages really quickly and easily. But I need to be basically right edge of the trap. If I look at this all the way through, this is exactly what I do for my practice when I'm going to go play. So I'm a, US mid am is like my major. I'm a between a +1 and a 1 on a given day. So if I'm going to go play a qualifier for a US mid am or for a North Carolina mid am or something like that, even before my practice round, this is what I'm doing. And I'm just, probably not the image, but a note on a piece of paper and just target on 8. I think it's right edge of the left trap. Because that's where, if you follow this 303 line off that 36, that's about where that goes through. That's probably my starting target line. Left on this hole doesn't look like hazard to me. I haven't physically been there. Then obviously I get on site and I'm in practice. Maybe the left is like actually terrible brush that's hard to play out of, and maybe we do need to just center it up. Maybe the trees on the right are a little better than I thought. But it's now going to make my practice round really, really effective. Because I'm showing up on, if it's a Monday qualifier and I'm playing a practice round on Sunday, I'm showing up on Sunday and it's like, okay, I'm going to stand on this tee box. I think I know what I want to do here. I always can tweak that. Wind gets crazy, whatever. Things get super firm. I think I can run it out into that trap, into that. If I think I can run it out into that pinch, 36 off that basically means I'm aiming in the trap. So maybe I want to ratchet back, depending on. But this gives me a nice, good framework of how to break down this hole. We'll do it for an approach shot as well. It's number 10 at Sleepy. Plays about 165, it looks like. So it's right between my 150, 175 numbers on my card. But this is obviously, we cannot miss the screen right at all. Like, we just can't. And so what is my two-tailed standard deviation? So it's 10, so it's 20. I have to be, and this screen is 32 wide. So I've got to be, 16, I got to be 4 paces left of center is where I would try to bring this ball down. And that is the closest I'm allowed to get to the right edge. And probably just where I should aim on any pin location anyways. I can go a little deeper and widen it up a little bit, widen up my landing area a little bit. But this is really good starting framework for where am I aiming on this hole. If this is a right side pin, I am not allowed to look at it. I am only allowed to look at something 20 paces off. Rob asks, how do you adjust for elevation and wind? And I'll address those separately. So elevation, if you're, I assume Rob is talking about like you're hitting down, not you're playing in Colorado. 10 plays down 80. Okay, it plays way down. So it's 165. If it plays down 80 feet, that's 30 yards. So it's functionally playing like 125, 130. Now my number goes down from 6 to 12, right? Because I'm hitting a 130 shot. Ball stays in the air a little bit longer. So if you hit it offline, it has a little more opportunity to go offline. So if this was functionally playing 125, then if it's functionally playing 125, then I would start with 12 as my number and tweak it from there. Now wind as a separate thing, downwind reduces our dispersion, into the wind increases our dispersion. So this is where the science meets the art a little bit. And you would want to kind of move that number up by about 10 to 20%. So let's say, okay, we know this is playing down, so it's now playing to a 12. And it's humming and like straight into the fan. Again, you guys know you hit that like 1 yard draw into the fan, it goes 12 yards left. I'm gonna maybe make the number 12 and make it 15. Again, rough, but I'm using this framework, tweaking it based on the conditions, and still helping myself out. So it's 32, so 15 puts me basically in the middle of the green. That's how I would apply this in kind of an imprecise sense. You could go and do a bunch of study. I literally was talking to one of my PGA Tour players about this, because into the wind is totally affected by what type of shot you hit. You hit a holder or a rider. Do you hit something that tries to stay under the wind? If you hit something that stays under the wind, or you have like a flighted wedge, it's not going to increase your dispersion as much as like a full 4-iron, into the same wind will increase it. So something we've talked about doing with tour players is getting on a range where we're dead into the wind, and then going to the back of the range where we're dead down and measuring dispersion differences in those scenarios. That would be how you'd have to study that. So, I just want to call this out real quick. So these two images come from maybe some folks have seen this. I'm always surprised at how little traction this website has. It's called provisualizer.com. Provisualizer.com, I think it's Google Earth for golf courses on steroids. It's great. I use it all the time like this. Sometimes pros go play events that don't have ShotLink data. Like they'll go play Philly Cricket Club this year, since the PGA is at Quail, so it's filling in for Quail for the Wells Fargo. We've never played Philly Cricket. There's no ShotLink data at Philly Cricket. I will use this website to help break down the holes exactly like this with a bunch of notes and player dispersion and da-da-da. So provisualizer.com. I don't know the people who built it. I was joking with Cody. I think I want to try to buy it from them at some point. It's really great. They pre-mapped dozens and dozens of courses. I would guess your course is already mapped in there. You can set the tee box and you can immediately start measuring all this stuff with like 1 or 2 clicks. It's like Google Earth built for golf courses. There are other solutions out there as well. This is just the one that I found works really well. And if your course is not on there, you can message them and ask them to chart it, and they'll just chart it for you. I've done that a bunch with like my qualifiers. I'll have guys go play in US Open sectionals, for example. This is what we'll do for US Open sectionals, since we can't break down a golf course that way. So just thought I'd share that really cool tool. So last thing that I wanted to talk about, which is related to all of this, but just a topic that comes up all the time, and I wanted to actually show the math behind it, because the math does not get talked about very often. Why does everybody hit driver nowadays? You guys have obviously seen this trend. You've seen it on tour. You've probably seen it amongst all the competitive players. Like your baseline assumption is I'm hitting driver unless I have a good reason not to. And this is why. I just want to go through the math. So let's say we can hit a fairway 70% of the time with a 3-wood. We know from ShotLink data that getting 20 yards down a hole on average is worth about 1/10 of a shot. And so we're going to assume that that 20 yards is the difference between our 3-wood and our driver. It's actually probably like 30 for high-level players because of how good drivers are nowadays. But for easy math, we'll use 20. And we also know on average, if you take a ball in the fairway and take a ball right in the rough right next to it, it's about 1/3 of a shot worse, 0.33. So we're going to use those two things to come up with, if we can hit a fairway 70% of the time with 3-wood, which would admittedly be a really high number, what's the minimum amount of time that we have to hit it with the driver to make their scoring expectation the same? And the number's only 40%. And this is why everybody's hitting driver everywhere all the time, even on holes that pinch, even on holes that, are shorter. And it's just kind of everyone back in the day, 350 hole, they would lay back to the full wedge. Now they hit to the half wedge. We know scoring obviously doesn't get worse as you go to half wedges. It continues to get better at roughly the same rate, or when you get really close to the green, it gets better at an even quicker rate. So here's the math. I think this is one of the ones that Cody was giving me a hard time about. So our 3-wood expected score is basically we hit the fairway 70% of the time. And let's say we hit that fairway, we would make a par. Like we would just make a par there. So 70% of the time we make a par, 30% of the time we score 0.3 worse. So our 3-wood expected score is 3.1, essentially 3.099. All we have to do is now create a driver expected score. But again, we're trying to solve for this number. How often do I have to hit the fairway to make this worth it? So I get my 1/10 of a shot benefit. I get my 1/10 of a shot benefit if I miss the fairway. I still get the 1/10 of a shot benefit because I'm further down the hole, but I get the 1/3 of a shot penalty. But how often can I hit the fairway, miss the fairway X, 1 minus X? To do that, you do a bunch of algebra. You set it equal to, so what's the trade-off number where it would be exactly equal to the 3.099? And you go through some math and you get 39.7%. So I just wanted to share that. It's it gets talked about a lot, but again, for easy math, you can hit the fairway half as often with your driver using these assumptions and have the exact same score. And what happens is if you do this dispersion work with your 3-wood and your driver, your dispersion is not going to be twice as large with your driver. It's going to be larger. It's going to be like 16 to 20 or something like that, or 22 to 26, but it's not going to be twice as large. So you're going to hit the fairway more than half the time. So that's kind of what goes into the whole semi-recent trend of everybody hitting driver everywhere. And I think for younger players growing up, it's a good habit to get into. It's getting comfortable with that early on, but also again having the framework to know when to come off of it as well. So that, how long did that take me? It took me a little longer, but that is what I have for kind of the education piece. So obviously, folks have any questions or want to talk through anything, happy to.
Well, first off, Corey, thank you very much. That was awesome. Yes, my brain still hurts. I probably got to look at that last slide about 500 more times. I think one of the things that maybe is like a false way to think about it is, again, I think we used to think, hey, I fade the ball, so I should aim left. But it's like, I was listening to a podcast the other day and it was like, well, Rory aims right and hits a draw, and Victor aims right and hits a pull cut. So it's more about using the TrackMan or the Foresight or the Flight Scope to capture where is that ball landing and at what yardage. So essentially, like, how you aim in your shot shape aren't necessarily relevant, because it's like you could play, again, take Victor for example. I mean, I'm not his coach or anything, but just like the podcast, the guy was saying he aims right and hits this pull cut, but like his landing zone could still actually be left.
Yeah, it's so the shot shape itself. Again, I'm always talking about your finish point. Where am I sent? What I really mean is, where am I centering my dispersion? On 8 at Sleepy Hollow, we were looking at, I want to center my dispersion in that left center, kind of on the edge of that trap. Now, I still don't know where the ball is going to land, and I hit a pretty big cut. I hit kind of that pull cut. So if I'm trying to finish it there, I'm maybe starting at left edge of the trap and trying to finish it on the right edge of the trap. That would be my ideal shot shape. Now, you could have somebody else who has the exact same opposite. So they're going to start it up the right edge of the fairway, try to hit a 20-yard draw because they're just a big sweeper with a driver, but they're going to try to finish it at the exact same place. And if they have the same overall dispersion, we can get to that same point a number of different ways. Where it becomes relevant, I think, for a coach or a teacher is, what is the shot shape they are comfortable with, and what is the shot shape that reduces our overall dispersion, right? So in that testing we were doing, let's say you have a player who can move it both ways and they kind of don't have a stock shape. It would be a really interesting experiment. Say, let's hit 10 cuts, 10 straight balls, and 10 draws, and look at which has that widest bell curve, right? And which has that tightest bell curve. And again, these all create estimates. You might want to do that a couple of times on a couple of different days, kind of a thing. And you might also know, like, hey, I have this shot in the bag, but it's less consistent for me. So I can hit the sweepy draw with a driver, but I know my dispersion's way wider with it, right? Because I can leave it out way right, or I can overcook it. And so I know I can only pull that out where I have to widen my dispersion. But from this kind of framework, this lens, I am always looking and thinking about finish point, which is essentially to say, where am I centering my dispersion?
So that's where you're taking the math and finding, it said 20, but there's a hazard right, so I'm jumping to 40, and then maybe you're applying a little bit of a deviation based on, hey, I'm going to fade it to that spot versus draw. Yeah. I mean, I think where it's helpful from a teaching standpoint, like, obviously I did this a little bit more in my own game. It was like, well, when I have a 7-iron in my hand and my carry number is like 176 to 178, when I actually swing 2 left, I had a tighter dispersion than actually swinging 0. So I think taking your information, applying it to our own game or a student's game, that's where it's like, hey, am I actually helping the player? Like, is chasing this 0 path actually the right idea? Because, hey, now my eyes are going to start to look more at like the dispersion. Like, I think we've all heard and have all had lessons like, hit from the inside, go hit this nice high draw. And I'm like, well, half of my members probably fail every test on TPI and probably can't do that. So like, actually, you know, I'm going to keep this guy at 6 left because that dispersion is tighter.
Yeah.
Unless you find a, you know, hey, I'm going to get your path closer to 0 and then fix your hands. Hey, then I can check that dispersion.
So this would be a great hypothetical, and this is not exactly easy to see right in the TrackMan software, but here's where I think it could be misleading, right? So if I went and tried to chase 0 path, which again I'm like -2, -3 with my driver, but if I just went and tried to chase it, I'd hit some -2s, I'd hit some +2s, I'd hit some -3s, I'd hit some +3s, I'd hit some, you know, I would jump all around, but I'm not good at that. My body biomechanics, you know, like I said, over the top, steep and tall. Like I will probably get to a place because I'm a good enough player where my average path is 0. If I hit enough balls, I can get my average path to 0. But that path number is going to be pretty widely dispersed. Like there's going to be some -4s and some +4s because I'm trying to like get way out there, right? But if I stick to something that really works well with my pattern, which is, you know, a -3 path, I can probably live right around, you know, between -4 and -2 all day long. So it's the same statistical concept applied to path numbers here. And my deviation of my path number is much smaller in, you know, in my stock shape versus this other shape. And then maybe it's just I need to figure out face, right? Because if I can get the face number constant, like I'm eliminating all the variables, right? Path is pretty consistent here. I don't want to change that. How do I get my face? How do I get my hands to understand the face path relationship and just keep that going? Because you know, there's plenty of guys out here, you know, who can make a living hitting a 20-yard cut, right? You know, as the player, and as I think as the player gets better, we can stop chasing that 0 as much. Obviously, when you're taking a player from being like a mid-teen handicapper to, you know, single digits, then you're just trying to get the stuff on planet Earth, right? So, okay, Jeremy, do you find most players are normally distributed, and are there many black swans in the data for amateur pro players, i.e., highly unlikely outcomes happening more often than expected within their statistical distribution? So I find top down the dispersion, the stuff we're talking about is normally distributed. You need enough sample. You know, in 10 shots, it may not take that perfect bell curve. You may just miss 10 of them right or 10 of them left, and it's not going to look normal. The thing that, you know, black swans are outliers, that's what the standard deviation number is designed to capture, right? So I tell players, like, if they're doing some testing to try to build these estimates and you hit one just 50 miles off the planet right, that stays in the data set. Because again, we're not measuring that like end to end as our dispersion. Because the one ball that goes 60 yards right of our intended target, which Lord knows I hit those, it changes the deviation number a little bit. But again, our you know, we're not going to be plus or minus 60. We're not going to be a 120 window that we have to look at. So we do keep that in because the standard deviation formula kind of keeps that there. We do see other distributions pop up, but in different contexts, right? So like the average putt, like the number putt length, for example, is log normal because you have a lot of putts really short distances, and then it drops off pretty consistently. So it takes a log normal distribution. I think Monique had more of an observation than a question, but the difference, teaching to ideals are numbers who have to go on a golf course and hold it out. Yeah, certainly the 460-yard par 4 doesn't give a crap what your face and path numbers are. It just cares that you can hold it out. So I'm a very big fan. I am not a golf instructor and I don't claim to be. But I'm a very big fan of like reducing variation at all these things. That's how I would look at it from a statistician's point of view, whether we're talking about the resulting dispersion or like the face and path numbers that go into creating that dispersion.
Where would you start with a player? Would you like, hey, what's your shot dispersion with your sand wedge? Or would you go, hey, just from 100 yards, this is kind of like, I need you to hit a hard shot, or is it, no, I need you to hit your sand wedge?
I would start with stock sand wedge. The 100 is kind of the placeholder for that, right? If that's 105 or 95 or 110,
Yeah.
80. Like, again, assuming we're kind of like the mid to low single digit type player, I would just start with, sand, pitch, 8. You can go through the bag that way. The 100 to 250 is a placeholder for that. But that would be the starting point because, and again, there's levels to this, right? There's just getting that basic stock shape, hitting a stock shot at a stock pin on a range, right? Then we think about wind, then we think about elevation, then we think about, well, I do want to hit a draw here. How does that affect it? Or, boy, I want to optimize for making par here instead of like we can layer in all this stuff, but getting that little baseline card built, or at least getting that baseline understanding built, is so key to all the stuff that comes downstream from it.
And then I think probably I don't see any other questions popping up, so I'll just my simple brain. I went to Ferris State. I didn't go to, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech. I went to a state school.
Both state schools. Come on.
So when you were getting those like standard deviation numbers, or just like that number where it was like, hey, you do the math on your driver and it said 20. But then you would say, hey, there's trees on the right of the 8th hole at Sleepy Hollow, and you then did 20, or you then did 40 away from that. Is that's because you're trying to get that whole middle part of the bell curve off of the tree line?
Yeah.
That's the point of it. Not just, I can, because I've heard some guys just be like, my shot dispersion is a total of 60 yards. It's 20 right, and it's whatever, maybe 40 left. It's not, I just got to make sure I'm not aiming 20 yards right of the tree.
Yeah,
it's like, no, I need that whole, I need to make sure that the center part of that bell curve is off of the tree line.
If I assess that tree line is essentially like a pitch out, it's something where I'm essentially taking a penalty stroke from, and I can't advance it up by the green, I need the ball to not go in there, 9 out of 10 times, right? Now, I can make sure I never hit it in the trees, and it would mean I aim, left of the left edge of the fairway. That's not optimal either, right?
Yeah.
And so we're kind of using these nice characteristics of the normal distribution, which is one standard deviation is 68%. That's your 2/3 of the time your stock swing falls in that nice 20-yard window. 2 standard deviations is 95%, and that's your obviously things happen, but 9.5 out of 10 times the ball does not go outside that 40-yard window. Now, again, that's with Ben On's numbers, right? And none of us are as good of driver of the golf ball as Ben On. So our numbers are going to be wider. You hear 60 kind of thrown around for players quite a bit, but again, your number can be so different. And the part of what we're doing, doing on the PGA Tour, and in this case, kind of translate to club pros and competitive amateurs, is like, you're not the same as the guy you're playing with, right? Like, you may be a better player, you may be swinging better. Like, these dispersion numbers are knowable, and so let's make them specific to you as a player to give you, one, a tailored game plan, but two, confidence in that tailored game plan, right? Because we can go, okay, just take 60 yards and aim 30 yards away from any trouble. Cool, good, better than nothing, but we can be more precise because we have launch monitors and things like that.
And then one of the things when we were talking on the phone, it's like, hey, so now we just went over this whole thing about how you kind of map the golf course. Like, let's say next week is New York State Open, Bethpage Black, first hole, let's identify its driver. But like you mentioned training, how are you maybe nailing down the training? Like, what does my player, from a stats point of view, like the yardage he needs to work on? Or is it more like, no, you just need to tighten up your driver dispersion? Maybe you could spend a minute. I know you probably got to go soon. It's 5 after 12, but maybe just a second on maybe how you're applying the training.
Yeah, so again, very easy to do at the PGA Tour level because we've got all this data, but still very doable. If I'm going to go play in a state open or a US amateur qualifier or something like that, which is, what are the tee shots I'm going to hit? And more specifically, what are the approach shots I'm going to hit? So something I do with all my players in the PGA Tour is, okay, so this week they're at the Amex, that stadium course that they're going to play twice. It's very different than next week at Torrey Pines. Like, Torrey Pines is a ton of forehands, right? And instead of just saying it has a ton of 4-irons, what I can know because I have access to ShotLink data is I know how far each of my players hits the ball, and I know where on average the field hits their approach shot from on every hole. And obviously the par threes are super easy to know. So given those two things, I can literally build my player an 18-shot TrackMan combine. TrackMan has they have custom performance tests essentially that you can build. I think you need them on the iPads, the TrackMan Pro app. At least that's what I use. And I can go in and build them 18 shots at the 18 distances I expect them to have this week. And so on Tuesday or Wednesday, when they are kind of at the place where they're, as comfortable as they're going to be with their swing for that week, and they need to spend time training execution, then that's the type of thing we have them go do. We don't just have them beat balls, we have them hit balls with a very specific purpose. So my personal philosophy is every ball we hit should have a purpose. And depending on where you're at in your cycle, your game, the kind of three things, I think there's kind of three purposes or three buckets I would put those purposes into. Obviously, Cody, if I'm working with you and we are working on getting that, that face number doing one thing or that path number doing one thing, then we're doing mechanical work. We're trying to find positions, trying to get the club to a certain place in space. We're doing that very technical work. Great. Two is I'm grooving that technical work, right? So I'm doing that. Now I need to do that. I need to make it repeatable, but I'm still doing it with that intention of like, I'm going for -2 path and, -1 face. That's my optimal. And I'm going to hit 50 balls, trying to hit those numbers and then seeing the numbers differ, trying to do it on the next swing, doing that stuff, right? Outside of those two, like technical swing scenarios, the third is kind of what I call execution-based training. And that is when we are just going to play the golf course, but play games, right? And one of those games that I do that's very popular with players, 18-shot TrackMan combine at exactly the yardages you're going to have. TrackMan's great. It spits us out strokes gain numbers, and we can kind of, have fun with it of, hey, for every 10th of a shot, every 10th of a stroke you gain, I owe you a push-up kind of a thing, right? That we do that type of thing. Same thing with putting, creating, we know where, a place like TPC Sawgrass is going to have a lot of missed greens, so it's going to have a lot of 6-8 footers versus a place like Amex this week is going to be a ton of hit greens, and it's basically a 25-foot putting contest, right? So we can train, again, with data, we can train that the same way, but there's no reason you can't sit and look at either a scorecard or a yardage book or a pro visualizer and in 10 minutes work through a golf course and say, okay, I'm about 150 here, 175 here. That's a par 3, plays 210. Boom. I can make myself an 18-shot combine. Even if I don't have a TrackMan, I can still do that and go to the range and hit those shots and just think like full pre-shot routine, think about execution, right? And that's that execution-based kind of training scenario. So that's how I kind of look at it. Obviously, at the pro level, players very robust training programs. Their swing coaches have them working on things, but where we kind of support is in that execution-based part of their training, making it as tailored to the player and to the golf course and what they're about to see.
All right. Awesome. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time. First off, thank you so much. That was, I should probably cancel my 1:00 lesson and say my brain hurts and we can't do it right now, but that was awesome. Thank you very much for your time. Met PGA, thanks you. Everyone that's on this call, we really appreciate you. And I know it's kind of hard sometimes. I'm reaching out to you guys. I'm like, hey, can you spend less time with Colin Morikawa this week and come talk to us club pros, please? It's a hard ask, but it's really appreciated. And thank you so much.
I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me, and look forward to hopefully seeing some folks when we're up at Bethpage in the fall too.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to have you stop by and play some golf and take a look at Old Oaks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
If anyone that's still on, just a reminder, again, we're going to get more educational stuff sent out here in the near future. We're working very quickly with that and just tightening up a couple final details. But you can put on your calendar February 5th, Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eileen Shapiro, Nutrition for Golf Pros. I'm really looking forward to it because she's local. She's in Greenwich. But if you're in Long Island, New York City, whatever, and you can't get to Greenwich, just like we're doing now, she can do Zoom calls and help you with your health. But thank you, everyone. And hopefully we'll see you all soon. Corey, thank you.
Thank you.